Здравейте! Вие сте с Stroicast на форума Лидерите, които строят. Аз съм Zekie и Emin. С мен е архитект Georgi Marhov и архитект Damian Iliev от SOM, с който ще си поговорим за архитектурата, архитектурното образование и за неговия професионален път. И разговорът ни ще бъде на английски език. Hello, we're very happy to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
We are at the forum where education plays a big role. The idea of the forum is to, how can I say, to invite young people into the fields of architecture and construction. This is why we want to ask you about your own professional path. For example, what was the reason that you chose to study architecture? What attracted you into this profession?
Well, I think ever since I was little, I always liked drawing quite a lot. Drawing different shapes, the human figure and buildings and nature. So I think it was like an interest from art that then got translated into architecture. And I remember when I was a student, I was looking at the list of all the different faculties I could choose from. Really, I kind of had a pretty open mind, and I remember that I was sort of focusing either on art, on architecture, or biology. So I picked the middle one, and since then I think I've been quite happy.
Why biology?
Because I was always very good at it, and I found it quite interesting to sort of to understand the natural systems as well. But not to an extent to maybe become a biologist, but later actually what I found in my research as a student, it became a good reference point into the designs I was researching. Yeah.
What I was thinking was that in our profession in architecture, we can connect different fields, so probably you found ways to connect architecture with biology, maybe?
Yeah. I mean, there's many ways how you can approach that. You could try to make architecture and nature blend in. You can mimic the natural structures. And actually, it's becoming quite topical now with sustainability being one of the main issues globally. So you see more and more people learning from the natural systems and making references to that more often. Yeah.
True.
And in your architecture studies, what can you say that was the most important thing that you learned as an ability?
The most important thing...
Yeah, if there is one thing even.
As a student, I mean, I guess I don't know, it's a difficult question. You learn so many things while you're at university, and you constantly remember them as you grow and work and practice. I guess maybe the understanding that it will always be a different project and a different response, and that may lead to a different design. So trying not to be repetitive, but to constantly look for new inspiration. So I think it's less of an education of a specific lecture, for example, or more a method, I'd say.
And after that, how did your career path lead you to Skidmore, Owings Merrill?
Because I studied, so I've been in architecture for about 25 years. And first I did my undergraduate, then my master's. And I think I worked in many different places, maybe over 10 or 15 companies, some small, some large. And what happened is, I think at some point in my career, I got interested into buildings that were technically being built to a very high and very professional standard. That led me to apply for a job at SOM, I think about 7 years ago. And since then, I've been quite happy working on many different projects.
So what you like most about your job now is the variety of it? Or because you said that what inspires you in architecture is always to try new things. So I translate it as you have a very artistic but also innovative approach to architecture in a way, because you want to find new things, do different
I like the variety. I think when you work for a big company, you're constantly exposed to different projects. Some are local and some are international. And you could be working on a project in London, for example, or a project in India, or like in my case, for many projects in Italy for a long time. So that variety, being exposed to different urban settings, different materials, different briefs from the client, and actually when you work for a big company, you also collaborate with a lot of consultants, and you have a very big team around you, and you can it's practically it's endless how much you can learn in the building industry when you're exposed to all these different sort of sources of expertise in a way, and in a way you get that in a big company. Perhaps you also get it in a small company, but it's a different experience altogether.
This is actually a question I wanted to ask you. How would you compare your experience in a smaller company and your experience in a bigger company? Because right now in Bulgaria, we are a small, how can I? It's a small field because the country is small and we don't have many large studios. Maybe we have one or two, and most of the people work in very small teams. They're generally 2 to 5 people, and this is how most of the architecture around here is done, and people locally have more experience in small teams. And how could you compare your experience in a bigger company and a smaller company? It's also of course abroad, but the dynamics inside the teams are very similar in my opinion, like when you work
the dynamic is similar. I think when you work in a small company, you get involved in pretty much every aspect of the project. You from the design to the construction, and you're probably like part of it step by step. Whereas in a bigger company, you could have a slightly more specialized place in it, where you only look at a specific aspect, because it's the work is too big for a group of like just 2 or 3 people. It needs to be spread, and it's very different. I think I believe people that work in smaller companies probably have a lot more involvement in the creation of architecture, whereas the ones that work in bigger companies, maybe the authorship is a little bit more spread out, and there's many different chefs in the kitchen as opposed to just a handful of ones like in a small practice. But big offices also come with advantages. You know, there's usually a very good working environment, and this begins to matter a lot for people that have families, people that have children, and it, I don't know how it is in Bulgaria, but I think in the UK there's this constant problem of finding enough flexible time arrangements to be able to have a life and to work. I think these are the things that come to mind, but
yes, architecture is, especially in smaller companies, a very time and effort consuming job, and people working in smaller companies spend, how can I say, their private and working lives start to merge in a way, and it can also become toxic, of course. Especially when you're too involved in your job. So this is an advantage maybe the bigger company gives, that you have more personal time. I don't know. That's just a hypothesis.
You've actually started, yes, a bigger subject that we have been talking about and writing about. It's the ethics in architecture industry. It's maybe a very broad subject, but you share with us a very important experience on your view on...
in terms of ethics?
Yes. What we hear from you, I mean, is very important for us, that you make this comparison. Because in Bulgaria, what actually also Zekie said, there are a lot of very small studios, and there isn't like a really clear overview, I think, of the working ethic in architecture. But what I actually initially wanted to ask you, when you work in so many different contexts, I bring us back to the subject before, when you work in so many different types of contexts in different countries, how do you manage to adapt to the local context?
I think it's always a challenge to design something that belongs to the context in general. And when you work on projects that are very far, the challenge becomes even bigger. And not just, seeing the site or understanding how it's used, but also having kind of an intimate understanding of the culture, the people, the environment, the changes that happen in that environment. You could try to do your research, but you may not ever really truly grasp it. So it takes time. Of course, you can go on site visits. You can travel to those locations and meet the client and meet the consultants or the local architects, and that helps a lot. It really makes a difference, because you can even come back and bring some of the samples or show pictures of the site to the other people in the team that perhaps don't have that opportunity to go. So it remains to be a challenge, and I think some of the most successful companies, not just SOM, around the world, do a pretty good job of maybe putting the finger on the nerve to get exactly the right type of a response architecturally that has a meaningful relationship to its surroundings. But how do you do it? I don't think there's like a recipe. I think there's some basics. You have to do your research, you have to do some site analysis, you have to read about it, have conversations with the other side of the design team that's based there. So let's say if we're working on a project abroad, we usually have a local architect that helps us understand all the local codes and all the regulations, and we have all the consultants that provide an in-depth understanding of how buildings can work there, or the contractors, the builders, how they in fact build it, because you can design something that's easy to build maybe in America, but actually could be very difficult to build in a completely different in China. So they have different technologies, different attitude to labor, different expertise, and so on. So I think there's no recipe. Every project, every location is a challenge. But if you do a thorough research each and every time a project begins, you can find some meaningful connections. And actually, you never work by yourself. The client is always there, and the local architect is always there, and they always listen to how you present the concept or how you do your research, and then they can raise their hand and say, well, actually, it's not really like that, it's more like this, and you adapt and you change.
So it's a profession of constant research, communication, and constant learning, as you said in the beginning. And also I wanted to ask you about your project that you're doing in Italy, about the Olympic Village. I think it really connects to the things that you already shared. It's related to sustainability. It's in a different country. And as far as I know, you're using some prefab technologies that are very popular in architecture currently. So we would love if you share a bit more about your experience working on this.
So that project specifically, that's called the Milano Olympic Village, and it's really, first it's being created to accommodate the athletes that are coming for the Winter Olympics in Milano. And then after the Olympics finish, it will be converted to be in its permanent state, to be a student halls of residence. And so it has dual functionality, and that's quite nice, because usually sometimes the buildings that are built for the Olympics are notorious for just being unused after that, or being
just standing there and
becoming redundant. Not everywhere, but I think there's been a shift in the past few Olympics to move away from that concept and be a little bit more sustainable with these huge investments that are actually happening. And the project is really six blocks that are connected with bridges, and next to them there's two small existing buildings, and our brief was to create enough accommodation for a certain amount of students, and also to to renovate the existing buildings and find a new use for them. And because it's being constructed for the Olympics, everything is happening on a very tight timeline. There's practically no room for error. You cannot deliver late. It has to be ready to be used. And throughout the design process at SOM, we were constantly raising that question. I was okay. Well, can we prefabricate this? Can we have off-site assembly to that? Or how fast can you in fact build these areas here and so on? And later, when we finished the technical submission stage, we got engaged with the main contractor company that took a look at everything that we were trying to do, and they were in fact very helpful because builders know how to do some things a little bit better than they're very good at building, right? So they advised and they helped, and together in conversation with them, we perfected quite a range of different prefabricated elements in these buildings specifically. So I think even starting from the bottom up, the basement had certain prefabricated walls. The major structure of the building, which were 8 stories high, had long prefabricated steel columns 3 stories high. We had prefabricated beams, prefabricated slabs to create the floors. And we also had all the bathrooms were prefabricated elements that were assembled off-site and then delivered ready to just plug and install. And finally, the facade. The facade was effectively a prefabricated timber construction that was made off-site with all the windows cut out and open. And when it was delivered to site, so finishing trades like the plastering, that's the final element on the skin of the building, that was done by on the actual site. So I think there's some interesting statistics. I may have forgotten them by now, but they were able to move so fast with the construction that they could build two levels in 2 different buildings in something like a period of 2 months. And that's quite fast. It's a really rapid construction. And when you go on these construction sites, which I've been to other construction sites where they have little components or little parts that are prefabricated. Well, but whereas on this one, a lot of the elements that made the building were prefabricated. So when you go on this site, it's quite interesting because it's very clean. It's very quiet. Things move very fast. It's a completely different experience, and it's good for the environment, not just by creating pollution throughout the construction process located somewhere in a city, but it's also good for the environment because all these prefabricated elements that are made in factories, there's a controlled stream of production, and if anything is wrong or needs to go to rubbish, it's sort of recycled and repurposed for being built again. And the site being quiet is good for residents around it. They don't get to hear all the noise and the commotion. So I guess the only drawback that prefabrication has is that it has a little bit more of a cost associated to it because it has to be made earlier in the process. It has to be coordinated much earlier in the process. And it takes a certain amount of time until it's ready to be assembled. It's not instant. It needs to be first made somewhere, then transported on vehicles that can actually drive through the city. You can't prefabricate an element that you can't actually put on a truck. But once it's on site, it's quite nice. This is when you see it kind of work very efficiently.
It requires a lot more planning, and it doesn't allow many mistakes, as it sounds like it.
Correct. But the good thing is that if there are any mistakes, they get captured in the factory. And it does require precision because once it's available on site, it has to fit exactly where it needs to go. But the construction of these prefabricated elements always has to take into account a certain amount of tolerance and movement, because nothing can fit perfectly. There has to be certain gaps and areas where things move and breathe, just to allow for that perfect final finish to look as good as possible.
What are the materials that the panels are made of?
So it's glue laminated timber panel system. So effectively layers of panels stuck together, with cutouts for the windows, and they also had insulation layer added on one of the sides, and so that was pretty much maybe 70% of the actual facade if you look at it in a section. Once it's positioned on site, the finishing trades like the interior plastering on the inside and the exterior plastering on the outside were done on site. But those are actually not that, they don't take a long time, and there usually are handmade trades, so you can't really prefabricate some of those either.
Some of the things.
Yeah.
Also, one last question about that project. Were all these prefab elements locally produced in Italy? So did you work with local producers and builders?
Correct, they were. Fortunately, the project is in Milano, and Milano finds itself in an area north of Italy, which is surrounded by a lot of companies from the Italian construction industry that work there. Some of the best companies, construction companies in Italy, are located just on the outskirts. So the manufacturing took place locally, which is important and something to take into consideration when you're designing buildings in whatever location, is like, how far does it actually need to travel? Because what's the point of going through the effort of making something, prefabricating something, to save energy and to reduce carbon impact on the environment, but having to ship it to the other side of the world, and that releasing greenhouse gases and through transportation in general.
This is one more proof that the construction industry is actually, and architecture is a very broad field, and if you don't have the infrastructure to build in that way, it's better not to do it. It's better to find other local ways, materials, and ways of production to do different buildings in different spots of the world.
I agree, but in a way, I also believe that the responsibility sits with everybody. If architects or designers demand that kind of an approach, then the construction industry can consider it. If the construction industry is also proactive and progressive, then it can influence architects to maybe start considering it. So there's no single source. And actually, in fact, clients too have to buy into the idea that this is a valuable construction method that they could adopt for the benefit of their projects. I think if everybody worked together, if everybody pushed together simultaneously, it could happen, as opposed to maybe just one side, one sort of identity being the only voice into sort of making this transformation.
On another subject, you mentioned that while you're giving a lecture here at the forum, you will be presenting a project of SOM in Sofia. Could you give us an insight to the project?
I don't think I'll have enough time, because I wanted to show so many of the other kind of prefabrication projects. But I can tell you a little bit. This is a project that we worked for a client in last year, and it is located in just near Ruski Pametnik. There's quite a there's an empty plot of land there located among the hospitals, and it's surrounded in a residential area. And the client sort of is asked to develop a big sort of residential development. But what's located in the middle of the site is actually an old car making factory that was built something like 120 years ago, or I can't remember. And interestingly enough, the structure of this little small building was designed by Gustav Eiffel, the person who did the Eiffel Tower. So therefore, even though the building is not in a good state today, it's been labeled as a protected monument to be repaired in the future. So we decided this is a great thing to kind of bring a certain identity to the surrounding residential development, and to a great opportunity to leave an example of how to restore and adapt a building that has no use today into something very useful for the community, the local community, and the wider community tomorrow. So it's very also similar to the Halite in terms of appearance and maybe in terms of scale, and hopefully can become something successful as that.
For me, a very interesting question, because I also specialize in cultural heritage. How did you actually find out that the structure was designed by Gustav Eiffel?
We were told. I mean, we didn't initially. We were invited to participate in a competition. We won the competition, and through our conversations with the client and the local architect, we received the information that we cannot knock this building down. It's a protected building, and the reason for its sort of current status as a protected building is because of its heritage associated to this very well-known structural engineer. I think that's where the reason for its sort of protection comes from.
And how do you incorporate the structure into the new project?
Well, we so first of all, the project is in very much a concept stage. I think the next stage after that is to go through the planning application process and really develop it technically. So it is not so defined at the moment, but what we're proposing is that the existing structure is repaired and brought to life, but because it's so out of date, it doesn't really meet the current structural building codes to hold the roof of the building and to be safe for occupation. So what I suspect will happen is there will be a hybrid of the old structure being repaired and maintained and still being very much there, part of the fabric of the building, but there will also be a new structural system that would be carefully or surgically positioned and included to do all the heavy lifting. So I think it's promising to be a really interesting, intervention where you get to think about, okay, so how do I introduce something that in fact sits next to the work of Gustav Eiffel? So it's like you have to be very sensitive. You have to try to consider the issues that he was trying to resolve at the time, and maybe to make a beautiful sort of hybrid relationship between the two. It's promising to be very interesting.
And what will be the use, the function of the buildings, of the new ones and also of the existing one?
So the new ones are residential buildings that primarily residential, that are also situated on top of a wider podium that has office component underneath it, and then below that there could be retail or sort of social facilities like gyms or kindergartens or whatever is then identified as important to the local area, and then the actual existing building is considered more of a sort of a mixed use space that could have both retail and maybe perhaps something cultural that will allow people to gather and certain events to take place throughout the seasons. In summer, to take place outside the building. Our proposal had these sort of auditorium-like seating spaces as part of the landscape, or even inside during winter, to activate the space and to really make it into an attractive, sort of a new destination for Sofia, both not just commercially but also potentially culturally. Yes.
Maybe just a few last words. Again, something, how can I say, as an advice to architecture students, to young people who want to follow the steps in this industry. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think maybe advice Well, the big things that are being discussed today are sustainability, and the other big thing that's being discussed today is AI. So I think the more young people can keep an eye on all of these moving subjects and topics and all the innovations that are happening associated to it, and all the changes that are happening both on an industry level, but even on a sort of a political, legislative level, and technological level too, are very important. I think it's very hard to keep up with that, but it's a indispensable part of the profession going forward. I mean, every single project now that is being constructed has to have some certain sort of high aspiration sustainability targets, and if it doesn't, the client is not happy because they cannot market the building and sell it to the price they want to sell it. It also brings value, and the architects and everybody involved in constructing it also see value into making something that doesn't hurt the environment. I think the construction industry is the biggest emitter of carbon gas in the atmosphere. So anything that we need to do to offset that is critical. And then AI, this is brand new. You know, not many people know about it. There's inventions every single day, but the possibilities of what I've seen of how it can transform how we work, how we develop our buildings are so amazing that I think our profession will look completely different in 10, 20, 30, 40, even 50 years of time. Maybe some of the practices today will get completely eroded and changed in the future. So I think keep an eye on that and be involved in that, because companies need new young people that come in a way trained and clued up with these things rather than learning them. So those are the two big things that come to mind wherever you're working.
Sure. Okay, thank you so much for the conversation. It was really interesting, and we'll see you later at the lecture.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.